I had ChatGPT to look you up and write a little
Yeah.
bio on you.
Oh, cool. I hope it. Wait, is it good?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. All right. Thanks, ChatGPT.
Well, you can tell me afterwards whether or not you like AIs.
I'm like, that's not even. Who is this person? That's not me. No, I'm
That's
just kidding.
right.
Like, it was another.
I'm sorry, that's the wrong. Kelly Young-Silverman is a multifaceted storyteller. Her work spans children's books, plays, and screenplays. She grew up in the Midwest and now thrives in the South. She studied theater in Savannah and brings that passion to her writing. As co-founder of Cake Baby Productions with her husband, David, she has created award-winning films. Her narratives are whimsical, playful, and rich with hidden poetic touches.
How does that? Okay. I guess I know what my next book will be about. It's like already telling me what I'm going to be doing next. All right. Now my next book. Here we go.
I just love it. It's just, I was like, well, that's very interesting. How much of this was right?
Well, I mean, it makes it sound really pretty, so I guess I'm going to say all of it. All the good stuff is right.
Absolutely. All right. Perfect.
I like the way they make me sound. It's nice. Keep going.
So what sparks your creativity?
What sparks my creativity?
Yeah.
Well, I guess a good storyline. If I am, sometimes it's a song and I hear a line in a song and I'm like, oh man, that would be a great story. Sometimes somebody says something about something that's happened to them, and just anything that can become a great story will definitely spark my creativity.
What does a great story look like? Like, what is the elements that make you think, oh yeah, that could be a good story?
I think if you can, I mean, to me, I think if you can write characters that people can relate to, that's always been important to me, especially when I was writing the screenplays.
Mm-hmm.
I always wanted it to have I wanted it, obviously the problems to be something that people can relate to. The characters were always, nobody was ever perfect. And just very real. That to me tells a great story, like those heartfelt stories. With the children's books, that is the whimsical element that you added. That is true. Like things that are really magical to me, that have been magical to me as a child. The moon,
Okay.
that was the first children's book I ever wrote, was about a little girl who wanted to befriend the moon. And so there's that part of the story. And then this new one, Hot Boiled Peanuts. That was a story about a little girl who goes on a food tour with her grandparents all around Georgia. And so it's something that I wanted it to be fun and as relatable, and something that, it could span over generations, because everybody, well, you would hope that you'd have those moments that you get to spend with your family, and that, even though learning about Georgia is fun and eating food is obviously wonderful,
Yeah.
and drinking kava is great.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's like, stop talking about kava.
There we go.
But I mean, food and, being able to celebrate being together, and I think food becomes a big part of that. But I think just making those memories. So that's when I write the children's books. It's really just about creating something special that they can share in the story, but also, the person reading it together, having a story that you read together as a family, that's really special. And, I remember reading the Dr. Seuss when I was a kid, and I would act out the characters. I remember my family laughing at me because I'd be in the bedroom by myself, like reading the voices, but just how important those stories were to me, just because you could bring them to life. So that's what I really want from a children's book, is to bring out that love of reading with the child, and those characters and those voices and going different places. That's where the children's books come in. When it comes to writing, generally, when I say my screenplays and stuff, they're a little bit grittier.
What does grittier mean?
Oh, so, well, I don't know if I want to share. Like, I mean, so just stories that may not be. They're not always sweet or simple, and you can't wrap them up with a bow. I mean, you've got, I've had the marriages that were going through trouble, families that were going through troubles. There was one about a father that gave up, he left his family, and then the daughter was so affected by this that she seeks revenge on him later on. And, in the end, you see that the pain that he's in and the pain that she's caused, it's never like good or evil. It's not like, I'm Tolkien where it's like, and who I love, by the way. Because like good, like that was like, you knew who was good and who was evil. And that can be brilliant.
Tolstoy? Is that who you said? Who's Tolkien?
Tolkien.
Tolkien.
Sorry. See, okay. This is you.
Yes, right. Yes.
See,
it's
now
so
you
good.
can't even, But like, you think of Lord of the Rings and it's like good versus evil. And it's so obvious who is good and who is evil.
Yep.
But I think sometimes in which, and by the way, I love everything about that. But with my stories, that's just not how I write. I think that we are all flawed. Humans are just flawed. And nobody goes around thinking, man, I really want to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
Maybe there are people, but it's very rare that that's what, people are really trying to do their best. And I think finding that, really your characters have to be someone that you can relate to. And then even if you can't understand why they did what they did per se, like that was not a great choice, you can still understand the humanness of that particular person. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're like, that person's just doing what they think is right. I don't think it's right, or I can't believe that this is their life, but this is where they are and this is how their choices are making, and they're just doing what they think they're supposed to do.
So if we talk about kids' books, how do you decide where this thing that is going to be really a compelling story? There'll be voices and there'll be all sorts of stuff, but where does that come from? Where you just go, oh yeah, this could be a good story.
Like where does the creative process?
Yeah, in other words, where's the impetus? Where's the thing that all of a sudden, like it hits you all of a sudden, like this could be a great story? What is it about that makes your first book?
I wish it were that simple to say. I wish it was just like, man, something just hits you. Sometimes you just sit down and you have to, I would love for like that one idea to just come and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. And this is the one. But a lot of times I'm sitting down going, I need to write a story. And I have to really think about, I just start brainstorming what would be a good story. But like I said, there are times where things happen in your life where you're like, oh, wow, this is great. And I think I could use this. But really it comes to, sometimes you just have to sit there and you have to start thinking about all these different, you get an idea. Okay, I want to do a road trip. How am I going to make this interesting? And that you've got that little piece, that little spark.
Yeah. And
that's great. But if you don't start brainstorming on it and building it up, it's just this little good idea that you could go in any millions of different directions.
So really, it's much more that it's something that it doesn't just all come into your head as a flash. It's hard work where you actually are developing it.
No, but I wish that would be awesome. I bet there are some writers that can do that. Like it all just like comes into them in the flash, and they just. And you do definitely I'm sure every writer is different, but there are definitely moments where I've got my outline and it's just coming and it just flows and it feels amazing because you're just typing away and then 500 words and 1,000 words and it gets really exciting. And then you stop and you take a break and you look back and you're like, oh, sometimes you're like, that's pretty good. Sometimes you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, that's total crap. I cannot use any of this. But sometimes it's like, it's really great. But it's a whole process and it's not an easy, I think when you're writing, it's a love-hate relationship. I say if you want to be a writer, you better love it more than hate it, because you're definitely going to hate moments of it. It's hard. It's hard to finish a story. It's hard. The middle is, to me, the hardest thing to write is the middle. Sometimes you've got the beginning, you've got the end, and then you're like, well, what's this? Because this is the meat of the story. Mm-hmm. I've got two buns, but you got your buns at the ends. But I'm like, I need all that substance, and that's hard to fill in sometimes. And there's definitely, I remember I've been working on this one YA novel, and it's just like there were moments that were really great throughout, but I'm still working to go, how do I make this great all together? Mm-hmm. And that's hard. And then, and then at some point you have to pass it over to an editor or someone else, because you're like, I'm just going to I will never be happy with this. So I'm going to have to give this to somebody else and see if they're like, okay, let's give it the green light, or if they're just like, we've got a lot of work to do. But if they can tell me what needs to be done, I will say I love, that is the collaboration part that I love. I love going, okay, this is great feedback, and then being able to put that into the work. So that's always fun.
Yeah. So, what part of it is the well? Okay. So what part of it is the least satisfying in the moment, but most satisfying at the end, or once you have it all done? Is there?
Least satisfying of the whole writing? I mean, you
Yeah.
talk about the whole, like, from beginning of end before the book even comes out there, or this is just the writing itself?
Yeah, because and then there's probably a converse, like maybe there's something that's really satisfying in the moment, but it's may or may not be that, and you may or may not be that satisfied with it in the end.
Yeah, well, I think that finishing a book, like finishing the story, is very satisfying. We're like, oh my gosh, going back and reading it and realizing that this is definitely not finished, which will always happen. It's like you go back and you're like, oh, that is the most unsatisfying. It just feels crappy, because then afterwards you're just like, is this ever going to be ready? Is this ever going to be ready? I mean, that's all you can keep thinking is, I don't know if it's ever going to be good enough, or when do I want to put that out and share that with people. But when you finish it, your first draft, that is pretty exciting, because you've invested. I mean, depending on anything, even if it's short, you still have invested your time in this story, and you're bringing these characters to life, and you've created this story. So you're like, oh, in the end. But I will tell you, and I don't know if I don't think I'm the only writer that does this, and I can tell just by reading books. Sometimes you're like, oh, you get to there's a point that you're writing, and then the end is coming. And I don't know, maybe this is like a racer thing. You start going, okay, I'm going to get to the end, and you just kind of plow through the end. You go back and look at that end, and you're like, oh, that feels so rushed, and it's just that's a tough thing. But yeah, so I think that went around your question, but it answered it somewhere in that. Somewhere in there was that answer.
Yeah. What is a hallmark of something that then later feels rushed? Like, is it clipped thoughts, shorter sentences, repetitive? Like, is there something that, or is it just because you said that you sometimes see it with other authors? So what is that thing that is like, oof, I don't.
I think, I mean, it's just, you've got this pace, and sometimes it's intentional. You have this slow and steady pace, and then you get the climax, and it's supposed to go a little faster, just like a roller coaster.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be really weird if the roller coaster just went like this all the way through, or even if it went really slow all the way down. But there's just, okay, it's not the speed. It's really if you're tying it all up. It's if you're trying to tie all the ends up all at once. And then, when it just happens and it's just so abrupt, like, okay, we got to end this. We know that this storyline, we've got the B line, we've got to end this. So they just start ending everything all at once. I think that, and you kind of get rushed in that feeling like, I know I have this person something has to happen here with this person, something has to happen with this. And you start building it up, and you're just trying to tie it all with a bow. With obviously, you can't tie everything up with a bow, but
did you ever read Tom Wolfe's A Man in Full? It was sort of set in Atlanta.
No.
That book at the end, you made me think of it, because it's just this beautiful buildup, and then these very complex, and then he wraps it all up after 800 pages or however many it is, and then he wraps it up in like 10 pages in which it becomes sort of nonsense, farcical. And it's just like, I remember feeling cheated, because I have invested in these characters, and I'm loving it, but then all of a sudden he just goes, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, what do you think you're doing? Like, that was frustrating. So that's interesting.
I know, and I think it happens. I think we do it with shows, we do it with movies.
Yeah,
because we're like, we gotta get there, we gotta end it, and you just start moving a little bit faster, and you start trying to just clean it up, like get the kids out, get them out the door. And you're like, come on, guys, we gotta finish this up.
How can we? And
it's hard, and also you've been working for so long. I think that maybe at that point, your stamina is just like, it's just like, I just got to get this done. I think it's just like, that's human nature, right? We just kind of say, we've got to get done, and we've got to be done with this, and we've got to move to the next. Yes, we've got to move on.
So this whole idea of, I'm going to stop for 1 second and pour a little bit more.
No, I'm like, I can totally feel this. I'm like, I don't know who this is going to, but I can totally feel this. And now I can't even do it. No, you can't.
Okay, no. That's awesome. um, you said something else. Where do you find yourself getting stuck in stories?
Where do I find my well, I mean, it really is depends on the story. I mean, it really does depend on the story. I will say they and I can't think of the words right now, sorry, but they do have names for writers that love to outline, and then authors that just
Yeah. So what's
the
your
free
process?
that like the freestyle. I think in my heart, I wish I were I was more freestyle because
So you're an outliner?
I am an outliner, but I'm a little bit of both. I outline, but I don't think I'm as meticulous as some people that can really like hit those beats and they have it all.
Yeah.
I do a loose outline and then I start. So I write the outline, so I know the things that I definitely want to hit, and then I start filling in from there. And that really has worked for me. It really worked. I will say on the last piece that I did, and I do feel this is probably the. I mean, it's a shorter story, so I guess that it does make it a little bit easier in the outline process. But I did feel like I had a good outline, and I was able to hit every beat, and that actually is very satisfying for anybody that is like, how do you hit like get satisfied as a writer? I'm like hitting all your word counts and your beats. You're like, okay, I did this just like I said I would, and this has happened with this character. That feels good. Um, so yeah, I would say that I'm probably more of a person that likes to have an outline, see where it's going. And then some stories, it depends on the length of the story where I just get a little bit lost. And the part where I get lost in is definitely that middle part that I was telling you about. There's just times where you're like, I know where I want to get to, but there's so many, obviously, I mean, it's just like life. There are so many ways to get here,
Yeah.
but how do I want to get here and tell the best story for these characters or for this storyline? So it's, that is where I get stuck a lot. I also love feedback. So sometimes what I'll do, I'll get stuck by getting really, really amazing feedback from people that I respect their opinions. And it's so different. Sometimes it's different from like they give me two different, they get hear two different things, or it just is so drastic from where I was going with it. So sometimes that can be difficult.
So how how often do family members, like your immediate family, do they tell you about your books or read your books and talk to you about it?
Well, I love sharing my books with my mom and my sisters. I don't think my dad's ever, I mean, he's read my book. Sorry, Dad, but I don't think I send you any of
Well,
my big ones.
the reason I ask this is my mom writes a daily devotional. She has for many years.
Lovely.
She's written 15 books, 20 books, I don't know, a bunch of books. And I don't ever read her daily blog that goes out. Like she'll sometimes go, "You were mentioned, so you should read today's." And my dad doesn't read it either. Like occasionally reads it. And then I've read maybe two of her books, but I just don't. And part of it is that filter of family through
Yeah.
the lens of this author. It could also be that like whatever she's writing about may not be directly aligned with my interest. But I think most of it just has to do with you. It's really hard to separate the person from when you know the author really well, even though they're fabulous. It's still as you're reading things, it's disjointing. You're reading things through your own eyes, and you're thinking you're reading it through their eyes. You may or may not be right. So I was
Yeah.
just curious how does it feel? Because I know Mom has said this, and I have another friend, Charlie. He's like, my kids don't read my writing, and I'm like, yeah, that's just normal. A kid's not going to read the writing. That's what kids do. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I say my mom, my family's big cheerleaders for me. I will say David, I will definitely, David's a writer too. And I have so much, obviously love and respect for him, and we work together. Sometimes we clash, but it's usually all good. It's mostly good. It's all good. It's good, all the time. Um, anyway, it's perfect. But no, I do. I ask him
yeah,
to. Sometimes he does it begrudgingly. He's like, "Oh, do I have to?" I'm like, "Yes," because I need your feedback. So I need to credit him more, probably in one of my stories. But like, yeah, David had a because he to me is a fabulous editor. He's great with words. He's great with just. He also knows how to keep things short and sweet. He's like, don't, and I can go on and not in like that good way. Like, who is that author that he always rides off? Goes off on tangents, but it's like he's so good. He, what is that? is terrible. I can't even think of my authors that I'm.
We'll blame the kava.
It is. That's the kava. I like how every time I say kava, I look at the camera. Do you like that? They're
much
like,
better with a product placement.
I'm like, it's the kava.
It'll be like, we don't want you, Greg. We really just, yes, get her to be doing our ads.
You have a lot of fun. You don't always know what you're saying. Okay. No, oh my gosh, this is going to kill me. It's, oh my gosh. I'm always like, I love this. John Irving.
John Irving, like, very good. Yes, John Irving.
I used to love it, but he would go off on these tangents, and I'm like, but they were beautiful and brilliant. I'm like, this all works. I went off on a tangent. I don't even know what I was talking about. So that's how bad that was. But I will go off on tangents, and they sometimes are just, David's like, no, you don't need, when they say kill your darlings, it's serious. Like, you think you've written something brilliant, and somebody will go, you actually don't need any of it. You don't need any 4 pages right here. This whole stack of pages. No, you don't need them. And that's
how do you handle that? Because I mean, that's one of the hardest things when you put your soul and your life into it, and your sweat and blood and emotional creativity and time.
Not too much blood, which is good.
Not too much blood. Yes, that's good. But like, how do you process that in such a way that's both constructive for the piece, but also for your writing, so you just don't get despondent and go, I can't write anymore. I'm done writing.
Oh no, I feel that all the time. I'm like, but I just have to push through that. I'm like, well,
why do you push through it though? Why? What makes you do it?
That's that love-hate where you're like, I just love it more. I love writing, and I love telling these stories. And, sometimes it's going to be good, and sometimes it's not going to be good, and that's okay.
Is there a payoff? Is there a quintessential payoff that makes the other part of the process?
Well, it's definitely not money. I'm just kidding. It's not money. I know, I'm just kidding. I'm sure it is for some people. I'm just kidding. But no, I think that, having that story out there and having people read it, and, I mean, it definitely, I'm seeing it obviously more with the short films. It's really exciting to see when you're watching the audience react. That's exciting. With children's books, there is definitely a payoff. It is, and I think it's different. I mean, I don't have a novel out there. I don't have, so that's, I think it's the audience's, with what your audience gets from your work, that is rewarding.
Yeah.
And, I mean, so it is wonderful to share your work. That's a big payoff. That's a big payoff. But also, I mean, just finishing
share means what? What does that look like?
Sharing it with the audience, like sharing it. And I call it the audience, your reader, if it's a film, it's your audience, but just seeing how it affects them. And it does. I mean, I think a lot of people can make connections with different pieces. So I think that is, like, with children, it really is a payoff to see, like, you're reading your book and seeing how the audience gets excited, or like they get excited about the fact that they have a story that they want to share. That's exciting. There is that. And then there's people that will, they'll write and they'll never put their work out there. And that, I think the reward comes from going back and you're your own audience and reading your work and feeling that satisfaction that you've put something down there on paper.
But could you do that?
Could I just do that?
Yeah.
And not,
is that, do you feel like that part of it, the process is what you're putting out, giving back to the world?
Yeah, I think for me it is. Like, that's where I would most likely write, to put it out in the world. Although there's plenty of things that I've written that will never see the light of day. They just won't. I mean, for many reasons. Some of it's personal, and some of it is, it'll never get published because it's not good enough. So like, no, we're not publishing that.
When you're writing something, how do you write? So do you also write then for yourself, for your own, whether it's a journal or whether it's in other words, as a way of communicating your thoughts, or even maybe figuring your thoughts out? Do you write for that, or no?
No, I don't. Is this okay that my feet are up here?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just
no.
I am not. I'm not really a journaler. Is that a journalist?
Yeah.
I'm a journalist though.
Yeah, I know. It was a little weird. Yeah.
But but I do find that a lot of my feelings will come into my characters, thoughts that I would have.
Ah,
It'll be very subtle, but they'll be there like, oh, I thought about this. Maybe it's something about death, or maybe it's something about friendship, or maybe it's something about life. But my person comes in there a little bit to each of my characters in different ways. So
interesting.
that is, yeah. Maybe
So in other words, it's that um, it's a fact. Do you somehow do you work out things in your own head or in your own life by virtue of having your characters work those things out?
that has never happened, but that's not happened yet. But
Okay.
maybe it will someday in
Yeah.
the future. No, that's never. But I've never written anything I think that has been that personal yet. I just haven't written anything like that.
Is that a
Um,
non-interest or trajectory?
is that a non-interest?
In other
Is that
words, that doesn't really apply to me, or you see that yourself. Like I've noticed sometimes as people write more, they feel more comfortable in various ways exposing themselves.
No, I think right now. I would say it's probably because the stories I want to write.
Yeah.
That's just not what I want to write.
Yeah.
That's just not. That's not how I would write. So I would say non-interest, but I'll say, who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
who knows what the next story will be about
How many stories are you working on at one time?
at one time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, is it different? So I just finished a middle grade reader, but an early middle grade reader, which is that's the 8 to 12-year-old range.
Yep.
I don't know why they call it that. Why they call it, because those are before middle grade, but that's okay. But I just finished that one, and I'm really it's the first draft of it though, and it just got sent off to the editor. I'm just like, fingers crossed they will pick it up. I'm putting that out there in the world now, that I'm like, please pick this up, because it's in their hands right now. It has not been selected for the publisher, but if it does, I would be very excited. But I was working on that, and I'd finished it. So sometimes
Can you tell us anything about it?
I can. Yes, I will. It's called Bond Adventures. It's Hold on. See, I can't even finish the title because of the stupid. No, don't. It's not stupid comma, but Okay, it's called. You have to edit that so that it looks like I know the title of the book I just wrote.
It's even better if you don't for the Kava commercial.
Oh my gosh, it really is. It does make you feel that's great. Here, kids, drink kava. It's great for you. It doesn't kill any brain cells.
Just slows them down maybe a little bit.
But only momentarily.
That's right, yes.
I promise.
Your mommy and daddy really do.
I know. They're like, kids, let's watch this interview of the children's book author you like. Oh my gosh. She's drunk on kava.
That's right.
Just don't put that on there, please. You better edit that out. Okay. No, so the book is Bonaventures, Tales from the Cemetery, or Tales from the Grave. I do know the title, yes, Tales from the Grave. But of course, it's working title because right now it hasn't been published and it's still in an editor's hands. But that is a playoff of Bonaventure Cemetery, which is down in Savannah. And it is about a little girl who, she's not little, I don't know. She's about a young girl who moves from Missouri to Savannah and is very excited because she is obsessed with the paranormal and all she wants to do is meet ghosts. So she's very excited to be moving to Savannah because it's the most haunted city in the country. And so she goes to Bonaventure and discovers that there is a very famous statue, or a very famous statue of a little girl who's buried there called Gracie Watson, and her name is Gracie Watson. So of course she has to meet this ghost. So she's, she goes to the cemetery and she's trying to conjure up this ghost. She's trying to summon this ghost, and she becomes friends with the groundskeeper's son, and they try to meet this ghost, and all.
Is that
Is
that the same cemetery as the Garden of Good and Evil?
I don't. I think that statue was there. That was just a statue. I don't think that was actually. It was not. That's not a gravestone, but it was just a statue that was there. But I think it was in Bonaventure. That's their big cemetery.
Okay.
So, yes.
Yeah.
I feel like I should know the history of Bonaventure now, since I'm writing a story about it.
You can make it be whatever you want.
Exactly, and I will. But I was really excited to finish that one. But while I was working on that, I was also working. I've got another book I'm working on that is a playoff of the Hot Boiled Peanuts, but it's when she's older and she's going on this trip with her grandparents, but she's going now as, instead of a little girl, she's a teenager, and how is this different, and all the things that are going on in her life as a teenager.
Do you feel like when you're writing, are you writing to a younger version of yourself, to kids, to like who are you writing to?
Oh my gosh, I feel like this is a publisher question. Like the publisher would be like, "Who's your audience?" They're putting you
I
on the
just
spot.
care. Well,
Do you know who you're writing?
like,
Who's your audience?
in other words, or is it?
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. Like, what's that? What's that person that you envision that's the reading it?
I with the children's books, obviously I envision, something that a child would love. I work with kids, so I mean, just like what was their language, what things do they enjoy. So I do that, but I also want, I mean, we were all kids once, so it's something that I want even adults to enjoy. I never want a children's book that a grown up can't, that the whole audience can't enjoy. So I mean, that's the people pleaser in me. Like, I'm like, I want everybody to love my books, every single person. You should all love the books.
I think of like The Little Prince.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I love that book. What's the characteristic of a book that both appeals to kids on one level, or even sometimes like maybe some of the Dr. Seuss's books, but then they also appeal to kids, but they really also appeal to adults, because there's what is it that makes them appeal to both?
I think there's a couple of things. I think it's humor always is a good, if you can add a little bit of humor, and not humor to go over the kid's head, but just humor that I think grown-ups can say, "Oh yeah, you don't get this yet, but one day you will get it."
Double entendre.
Yes. The what?
Double entendre.
Yeah. So it may not, and this is funny, but there's a show called Bluey, but it's a kid's show, and kids love it, but adults love it too, because they have the parents in there, and the parents, they're very relatable cartoon characters. But it's just, I think that, if you can add humor that is mature enough that even grown-ups can laugh at, but it's still something that kids could say, oh, it's not over their head, and it's not trying to insinuate. Yeah, it's not saying one thing. No, it's just something that I think that you can relate to, just because you were one time a kid, or now that you're a parent, you can say, oh, that makes sense now. I think that is always good, being able to make somebody laugh.
The fun stories, maybe.
Yeah, and I think being able to, if there's like a little bit of reflection in the story, because I think that's important. I think that way.
Why is that important?
I think because I think that if it's the character is reflective and they're looking back on something, I think that we can all relate to that in a way. And I think it's something that, it's good. Like, to me, I can't think of The Little Prince, honestly, I can't, but I think that there's a little bit of something nostalgic in there, that that maybe you can still take something away from it now in a different way than you took away from it than when you were 9 years old. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So the story grows with you. So you'll always, like, I go back and I think of The Giving Tree, and The Giving Tree is not the same to you now as it was when you were 9. It just means something different. It still meant something to you then. And then if you go back and read it when you were 16, it's different than when you were 6. When you're 26, there's always something you can take from it. I think that makes a really great story.
I agree. And what is that? Is that it's easy access to metaphor, or to life metaphor? What is it that makes that happen? Because there are stories that are clearly just feel like stories, but then there are stories that have something that is that captures the imagination of adults.
Yeah.
And
I think that's a good storyteller.
Okay.
I think it's a gift that some storytellers, some writers really have. They just know how to tell a story, and they, think about, like, you think about the tradition of storytelling, and the grandfathers telling the kids a story that's happened to them, and it's just something that they can, they can just go on that. They just tell it in a way where you're with them, you're in the story with them, and you can feel those emotions, and it's not forced. It just, and they're like I said, that reflective piece. So they're looking back on it as from their eyes now, and they're able to see it as themselves when they were 6 versus as themselves now. And it's just, they just know how to tell a really good story. And sometimes sometimes it feels like when it happens and it turns out to be really good, it almost feels like it's like a happy accident when you're like, oh, that actually works. And, and sometimes it doesn't. It does feel forced. And, it's not really, it's not the writer's fault. It's just, it's just sometimes the words just come out perfectly.
Have you ever had this happen when you got down to the end and you just said, "Oh, I don't like this. I don't like where these characters are." Do
Oh,
you ever
yeah.
lose control of the characters?
Yeah. 100%.
Why? When I hear people say that, I don't understand. So how does this happen?
I don't understand either. Why does it happen? You're like, why didn't this turn out the way I thought it would?
Yeah.
You know what? I bet there are really, I would say there's probably writers out there that are really amazing. They're like masters of their craft, and they are probably master teachers of writing. Now I'm not going to be a master of writing if I tell you this. You better delete that. Because it sounds like I don't know how to teach writing. But no, there are moments with I think even when you are trying to, especially if it's like, oh, this is, you've got the whole story. I think sometimes you just you get lost in the storyline, and you get bogged down with the different characters and the different feelings, and you do go off on those tangents. And I think that's where, for me, a good outline is what could save it a little bit, because at least you can stay on track. As long as you have that track going, okay, I at least need to know. And I think that's hard. I think that the prep is just as hard as the writing process, just the outline and making sure that your character's arc is happening. All that is just as much, you have to put so much work into all of that. So sometimes you do just want to like write the story. But if you don't know where your character is going, or you don't know what that character's feeling, you can they just get lost. You get lost as a writer because we're human and we make mistakes. But for me, I think if I don't have a good outline, I'm definitely going to get lost, because you could go, like I said, go off on so many different directions, and it is really defeating when you're like, oh, I have put so much effort into this, and you go back and you read it, and you just look at it and you're like, it's just not where it's supposed to be.
You mean the characters have not gone to where
it may be the whole plot. The whole story may be just completely derailed. And sometimes it is the characters. You're like, well, how do we end up here? And maybe it's just like, you're like, I wish that their arc would have been different, or I don't feel like they even have an arc. Like they haven't grown at all. And I can't have that in a story.
So that's an interesting judgment. Why could you not have that in a story?
Where the characters don't grow?
Yeah.
You mean because in real life that happens? People don't grow?
I try not to.
You're like, I was perfect from day one. I don't have to.
No, it was deeply flawed from day one, and there's no improvement.
You're like, just leave it. It's fine. Just leave it as it is. I think, why do I want my characters to grow and change? Because that's the hero's journey. I think I think ultimately, you can write artistic pieces, but I think when it all is said and done, you want your character to grow, just like in life, you want people to grow. But
okay, so how has AI played a part in writing?
I think that I think you can't be afraid of AI, because like you said, it's here and it's coming. I think there's this fear that AI is going to take over your writing. And it is true. You could put something into AI and it will write a story. And sometimes they're not bad.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily great.
Yeah.
But the reality is that if, like, I could write something and not have to think about the punctuation, and this is something that I would normally think about, is just all the grammar, or I would think about the punctuation, or just the style, like making sure that it fits that I'm using the right, when I'm using the dialogues, am I using the right, if I'm using parentheses, or if I'm
So
everything it's a paragraph, it's the right form, the format. Sometimes you can just go in there, and if you've got your story in your head from beginning to middle, you just put that in there, and you're like, okay, this is my story, and you tell them, and you can be very specific, edit this for grammar.
Yeah.
They can go in there and they'll edit that for grammar, because even when you send it to a publisher, you still have to, they don't want your grammar, they don't want your crappy grammar, they just don't.
Yeah.
And and when you're writing your creative process, sometimes you're not even thinking about the grammar, but you want it to obviously be the best.
Yeah.
But this could save you hours of just having to go back and fine tune every little grammatical mistake. Of course, you did just say that you've seen that AI has made some grammatical errors. And so it's not perfect,
Well,
but it does, it will go back and it will put everything back. So say you just start writing your words down. You've got the whole story. You've got your, you know where your story's going. You've got your 500 words. And then you say, edit this for grammar. They'll go in there and they'll put it back in the right format. They'll put it in the right format that you need. And you've got your clean, it's the clean version of your story. It's still your story and it's still your words, and you don't have to be afraid of it. And I do feel like they could probably introduce this to school. I know there's a big fear to introduce this to kids, because the fear is the kid's going to say what we had talked about, where it's like, write me a story about this character. And it can do that. And it can do that fine in a way that, it might be better than some kids writing. And you're like, this is not what I want the kid to do. Although, but you could teach the kid how to use AI in a way that will actually make their writing better. It does probably, editors are probably, but not a good editor. I think editors that really want to really focus on the creative, I think they appreciate it, because it's like, okay, I've got a clean story and now I can really do what I want to do. And that's, I want to edit to make this story good. And I want to figure out like where, if this story is flowing, where are the revisions that are going to make it more powerful, where, because sometimes you have to take a whole chunk of your story and you need to move it 2 chapters up. And that's a whole other process that's like a whole other piece of editing that's the hard part. But if you can go in and use AI to help you do the grammatical things, yes, you could use it and abuse it, but I think that if if that's the fear of that writers are gonna do this, I guess that doesn't really scare me too much, because if you're a writer and you can write a really good story, it's just like it doesn't matter if AI can write a good story or not. It's not going to tell your story. You're going to tell your story, and your characters. But it can, but you can use it to help clean up your writing, to make it the best that it can be before you send it off. Because like every writer's before they send it off to the publisher, publishers don't want a bad version of your story. They want the cleanest version of your story. So go in there and say, clean this up for grammatical errors, clean this up for this. And it can go in there and it will clean that up for you. So I say, figure out how to embrace AI, because it's here and it can actually use it to help make you better at what you do. And I'm assuming that's what every industry out there is trying to say. The people with their emails, even as an educator, there are times when I know I have an email to write to parents. I've been at school all day and I'm like, I know I need my heart in there, and I know that I want to say this because we love your child and we want the best for your child. And I'm like, okay, how do I write an email? So I'll go in, I'll write the email, and I'm like, okay, make sure that this is sincere. You can actually put in and make sure that this email it is effective and it is sincere. And it will say, okay, here's what I've got, and it will keep your words. But if there's something that says, hey, this wasn't clear, it can help you in that way. And I think that's great, because then I can go back. I edit my work, AI can edit my work, and then I can go back and edit AI's work to make sure that it is still my voice. Because ultimately, when it comes down to it, it's got to be your voice. But even as an educator, there are so many things that you're putting your time into in different places that I think that industry should 100% embrace. Because like you said, it's here. I think every industry should be able to embrace that. Even the creative. I know creative, we get scared because I don't know. I guess we're afraid of being replaced. So but I don't think I don't think there should be a fear of AI I don't think AI is going to replace creativity. I think, there are people, when I think about film and I think about, it's, people are like, well, they just want to make, it's all for the money. There are films that are out there literally just to make money.
Mm-hmm.
It's not good or bad. It just is. It's just the way it is. And that doesn't, so if you are a person that's like, I wrote this story and I wrote it from my heart, I don't feel like you think you're competing with that person.
Alexa, off.
I don't think you think you're competing with, and I'm not going to use, but like you're trying to compete with those big blockbusters, because you have a completely different story.
Yeah.
So I think that you just have to learn to, I mean, just like we have to coexist with everything in this world, you just have to learn to coexist. And if there's a tool that's out there that can help you better, make you better at your craft, that you should embrace it and find a way. And, be a pioneer of if you're like, oh, everybody else is scared of this, how can I hop on? And I remember the technology teacher, because at first I was like, oh, there's no way I'm going to have anything to do with AI. And it was the technology teacher at my school, and she was just showing us these different, really wonderful ways to use it in the classroom to say, hey, this is going to make you a better educator. And I thought, oh, well, this is brilliant. And if this is, but I'm also a writer and I'm creative. And I'm like, oh, there's a way that I can use this to make me a better writer. And you should not, I don't think that you should be afraid of it. You should figure out how to use it in a way that's going to make you better, not replace you, or not to be dishonest, because I don't think it is a dishonest thing. I think it is something, it's a tool, just like anything. I mean, just like, Grammarly came out before, which is, like you said, it is AI. So, I mean, it's a tool that we use.
Yeah.
We tell our kids to edit their work, and then they have this amazing tool that can help them edit. It doesn't mean they're going to be any less. If they still see what their edits are, what their problems are, they can still know next time, okay, now I know how to make it better for the next time, and grow from that and grow from that.
That's a really hard, I think that's a harder thing. Well, it's an unstoppable train for sure. Like, it's not like we're going to be able to, but you brought up something really interesting, in that, what that was, about creatives being afraid of AI, writers being afraid of AI, whatever. And I think maybe part of it is just simply the ephemeral nature of what creative is, in the sense that it's open to interpretation what the right or wrong thing is. And if it's open to interpretation, that means that when an AI wants to hallucinate, the good part of hallucination is creativity. So when it wants to hallucinate, it feels like it's invading our space, because our space of creativity is full of hallucinations. And it's like, oh my, that feels like you're in my lane now. We want you to go back and manage the rules, like grammar, where there's yes or no's. But if as AI increases, and it becomes PhD level, and it becomes like, and has all the world's books are at its fingertips, I mean, it should be able to produce masterpieces that we thoroughly enjoy.
Yeah.
And I found one of the things, and people say, oh yeah, I can tell what's written by AI. No, you can't. That's just someone who didn't know how to do AI. Like,
still user error.
Yeah, it is. It goes back to humans making mistakes.
Well, I mean, there's also, I think, like you said, you were talking about the creative part of us. I mean, we're so, I think creatives have this, when you're creative, I think you have this tendency to also, you're very sensitive and hyper aware. And even if you don't want to feel like you're being judged, I think like you're like, oh, but what if they don't love my art? You do it for the art, and they're like, what if and you know what? And sometimes your art, somebody else is going to hate your art so much.
Yeah.
And you can't, and that's just
Trust me, as I started to paint, there's plenty of people that go, what are you doing? This makes no sense. I even say that sometimes, but
I know, I think so. It's just, so I think that there's the fear of just maybe being rejected, like the feeling, but you're already in that world. You're already the arts is I always say it's very humbling. Like, there's something satisfying about it, but it's also, you're very humbled every day. Every day there's something that's going to make you go, oh, that's,
so then how do you, to your point where you said earlier about kill your darlings. And that's one of the difficult things with AI, is that it has no emotional attachment to any darlings, and therefore infinitely creates in a way that is maybe not unnerving, but it's different.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe the next career that will be out there will be AI writers. That's probably the next. I don't know if I'll ever become one of those, but I think there are definitely that. I would not be surprised if that becomes a thing. I think there's already AI artists, so I mean, I don't think that. I don't think it's anything to be scared. I think it's just a different way of thinking. I don't know. I mean, I think that it's going to be interesting. I wish I were more tech savvy and more, I mean, I definitely will like to dive in a little bit more and find out a lot about how all this stuff works. Because I think, like you said, I think there's going to definitely be some really brilliant things coming out there. But I think we're all in this same world, and I don't think it's just the arts anyway. I don't think it's just the arts. I don't think it's just education. I think it's every industry out there. I think we're all trying to figure out how what is this, like Black Mirror? I think of this show because I know that they do a lot of this, but it's just like, how do we embrace this, but then still still remain human? And what does that even mean to remain human? I mean, these are such, and I'm a spiritual, like I would say that I'm a spiritual person, and what grounds me is God and my relationship with God. That just, so to me, that's a deeper, like there's something deeper in the world. I think you have to find things that ground you, but that make things matter, I guess. But I think this is just gonna be an interesting time, and we're just in an interesting time in the world where, how do we? And sci-fi is so interesting because it makes it like it's great for horror films. Like, like you're terrified of what the future can hold, but also instead of looking at it with fearful eyes, looking at it in how, I mean, maybe with all this AI, maybe it can actually get us closer to being more connected or more human, our humanness. We don't know. I mean, it's still this amazing mystery. And I mean, there's something, it's big, and it's, and it could be something beautiful, and we don't have to be, of course, everything that's great also has flaws, and it's imperfect, and it's terrifying, and it's scary, and they say in the wrong hands can, but I don't know. I don't want to go through life like being afraid of what's about ready to come, because it's coming regardless if I'm afraid of it or not.
This is so true.
So just embracing it. And I think that's, just embracing it from a creative point of view, other than embracing it just as a human. I mean, it's in human, because this is happening to all of us. It's happening to all of us.
So if I was someone who was just wanting to start writing, what would be your advice? Read.
Yeah. I mean, one hands down, I say.
And should I read, does it matter what like, if I want to write kids' books, does it matter? Do I need to read kids' books, or can I read?
I would read kids' books. I mean, I think reading, first of all, I mean, this is just like the beginning of it all. I would say, even with our kids, I mean, I teach kindergarten. I teach the biddies. I teach the little bitty babies. And it's all about reading and just learning, like hearing the words, hearing the voices. It's the voices. You're hearing these different voices from all over. You're here, they're learning this amazing vocabulary. And sometimes it's going to be ridiculous and silly, and that's okay, and that's great, because sometimes you need ridiculous and silly, and sometimes it's going to be profound and wonderful, and sometimes it's going to be poetic. But here, I mean, read it all, and and you'll find your style. Your style will come. I mean, I would say read. I always tell the kids, look around. There are stories all around you. But I think understanding stories, you have to know. I mean, before you know how to write, you're definitely going to want to know. You have to read those stories to know what makes a great story. What makes a great story to you? Because what makes a great story to somebody else could be completely different. And you find your voice from what's inspired you over time. So yeah, read, listen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This has been great. It's been awesome.
And end. You're just like,